All right. Welcome, everybody. You are in the AV session, the Audio Visual Inclusiveness, what is this called? Ensuring Accessibility in Classroom Technology. So hopefully you're in the right session. Welcome. So we're going to get started today, and we're going to introduce ourselves really briefly. I see some familiar faces, but also some not so familiar. So maybe I just kind of, if it's okay with you guys, I just want to really quickly just say your name and where you're from, just so I have an idea. So we'll get started with us. I'm Kelsey. I'm the Assistive Technology Coordinator at UMass Amherst. I probably spend about 10% of my time on assistive tech and 90% on accessibility, but here we are. And I'm so lucky to be presenting with these two lovely individuals. Scott?
My name is Scott Pullen. I'm a senior systems engineer for IT, and I work not only in enterprise support, but also the Computer Classrooms and Innovate group.
Hi, my name is Matthew Mattingly. I'm the Assistant Director for Web Development and Multimedia. I also work on the committee with Scott and a bunch of other people on the AV accessibility of computer and those kind of computer systems and AV systems.
So really briefly, just your name and what school you're from.
Brandon Brake, UMass Lowell. Bill Super, UMass Lowell. Ray Gentle, UMass Lowell.
John Mellon, UMass Lowell.
Nicholas Chavez, UMass Amherst.
Joyce Morgan, UMass Boston.
Great.
Zoila El Torano, President's Office, Shrewsbury. Emery Duchamp, UMass Ed. And Teresa Visita, UMass Boston.
Matt Paul, UMass Dartmouth. Pete Thompson, Matt Lowell. Josh Pierce, UMass Amherst. Matt Duffin, UMass Boston. Paul Suzuki, UMass Amherst.
Great. Okay. I just like to know who's in the room, and I think we have people from everywhere, which is great. So we're going to get started.
Okay, so we're starting with just an introduction to the issues. You're all probably aware of the basic issue of accessible AV classrooms and other media installations, but there are some specific points we want to address. We also will be sharing some possible solutions and the process that got us to this point. And after that, we're going to open it up for questions and discussions. So the first one is that AV classrooms need equal and equitable access. Anybody should be able to independently use the AV equipment. There's no specific standards for AV now. Currently, they're mostly related to telecommunications. Can I scroll this down?
Yep.
Yes, I got. So on the legal side, the telecommunications law and AD 504 laws apply. AV equipment is not necessarily accessible, and in our experience, the VPATs have not been up to date. So it's been harder for us to even get a sense of what's out there.
Does everybody know what a VPAT is? Okay, a VPAT is a voluntary product accessibility template. So basically, it's a tool that vendors who are selling a product or a service can fill out that really just says how accessible they think they are based on standards for accessibility. It is by no means something that tells you something's accessible. If anything, we use that to find out how much the vendor knows about accessibility and about what their product does. So it's kind of like our first experience in a long fight. So the VPAT can be useful in determining information about how prepared that vendor is to have a conversation with you. Yes, just wanted to make sure.
So we're looking for solutions, and these have to be both technical solutions and institutional solutions. We have to figure out the policies and the guidelines to go with these solutions.
So I wanted to let you guys know on your tables and also online on the retreat, wow, we're having issues with speaking, retreat website, there's a worksheet. It's called the AV Accessibility Planning Worksheet. You're welcome to use the ones on your table, or if you want the electronic copy, it's on the retreat website. This is, as you're going through this discussion with us today, please feel free to look at this and start thinking about it. This was a lot of the process we took in determining how are we going to tackle this issue on our campus. Thank you so much, Scott. This is a pervasive issue for a lot of campuses, not just UMass Amherst, and a lot of people haven't really thought about it because even though we see litigation in this area, it's not as obvious as things like content, class content. So this is a real proactive process that we're taking, and we're so glad to kind of share that with you today. We're in the beginning of it, but start thinking about, start filling out this worksheet. And then we're going to have some time at the end to process that with the people around us, because this is so important. And hopefully at least you'll be able to take this with you and start the conversation, which is always step one.
So how did we get here? And we're going to share a little bit of the process that we've been going through, because it's a long process and it's not necessarily a linear kind of top-down process. For us, it really kind of was bubbling up from all different parts of the university, where people who had concerns about accessibility would talk to other people and try and nag the higher ups to pay attention to it. There's been a lot of that going on for quite a few years. And next in the last year, things have really taken off a lot, which has been good. But it's still a messy kind of a way of doing business. And I imagine that it's going to be like that on your campuses too. So we wanted to go through a little bit of that history. So going back, this particular thing started back last August when we were first putting together this committee about AV computing hybrid installations. And at that point, accessibility wasn't part of the agenda or the charge of the committee. It was more about standardizing the equipment and making sure that we just had everything up to the same level of quality.
The goal was for the document to be handed over either internally or externally to a vendor or within our other groups, so that, hey, this is what we do it. So we have the networking group, give the networking, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a package that we have everything all written down and standardized.
But in parallel with that, Scott was working on this new Feinberg Innovation Space, and some of these questions were coming up then. Scott saw the lack of ADA considerations in that and began talking with Kelsey. And at the same time, I was bringing Scott into this AV computer hybrid working group. And
So people who are like, what's the Feinberg Innovation Space, just really briefly?
We will get to it, and
Yes.
it is a renovated classroom. We'll just start with that.
But just so you have a frame of reference.
You will see it later.
So in November, we had the first meeting of this big committee on the the AV computing support. We call it different things, I guess. So we formed this working group. I'm having trouble with my little interface here. I want to make sure I say everything. So we were charged to identify current and future needs and to recommend a service model, including staffing, training, and coordination, and so on. And by March, we were talking about accessibility, but we hadn't involved, taken the next step, which was to involve Kelsey. So on June 1st, we had this first meeting where Kelsey came, and Scott was here, and the rest of the committee was there. And Kelsey and I had met earlier and sort of come up with an outline for what we were going to go over. But this meeting was really great. It was one of the best meetings I've ever been to, because all the right people were there with a really positive attitude. And we came up with some solutions that we're going to share with you, that they're new ideas, they're untried, and that's why we want to get some input from you on them as well as share them with you. But I thought it was really exciting. So
one of the biggest things with the group is we had representatives from all different types of groups. Paul actually is on the committee.
Yay.
hey, Paul.
He's not actually part of Central IT. He's part of administration and finance and their IT group. We have people that are just AV guys, not much computing. We have network and security representatives, and we're just trying to get the whole scope, and having all of these different minded people, it really kind of helped shape the way the conversation went. Because I know we didn't follow the outline very well in the meeting. Once we went down the rabbit hole, we're like, oh no, we can do this, we can do this. So it was definitely a melding of the minds.
So as you're kind of looking at your worksheet, when we talk about stakeholders, those are the people that you want at the table. You want someone representative from all of those different areas to be able to really give you insight you need to make sure that this is successful. Yes.
Do you have faculty?
We're working on that. That's that we need it internally in-house before we go and start working with faculty to get their input as well.
And there's some reasoning around that in terms of the classrooms that you'll see later and how those will function.
They are in our thought process, but we are not there yet.
Right. So even though we did go off on tangents, we started with a pretty good conceptual framework, which is important too, because it was all kind of novel. It was a novel thing to be putting these different ideas together, involved, procurement and technology and policy and education. Many of things all had to be considered at the same time. So we had this process here. We started with identifying the problem, which is kind of the first slide that we had. What are the barriers to current AV setups? What are the standards that we can use? And we figured out there aren't many really good standards that we can use. The best thing we can do is the telecommunications.
That and the ADA, the architectural access standards were really helpful in terms of considering placement of technology. So where you place buttons to be used or screens, heights, things like that. So kind of the combination of the two of them together were really the strongest thing that we could find.
And then we were looking at what products were available, and this is where the problem with the VPATs was. Sometimes the data were not there to tell us the answer. But we did have in this room on the June 1st meeting, we had a lot of knowledge about that. And as far as innovative solutions, that's when it really got fun. So we have the whole thing documented. We have a web page. Can we just go there from here?
Go ahead and click on that.
I'm going to have to sign into it, though, probably. That'll be boring. But you can talk while I do that.
So also on your worksheet is where will you house this information? So we decided to house it in Confluence. And they already had, the AV working group already had documentation in there. So we became a subset of that, the accessibility considerations. And this is where we really documented all those questions you see here. What are the barriers? Where can we pull from? What standards? So there were places where I was also working on educating people about this who maybe didn't have a full understanding of, well, why is accessibility important? Oh no.
Just keep talking.
Okay. So there are some really great images that we will be using to show you in a second once we pull this back up. But has anyone heard of universal design as a concept? Not just for learning, but actual architectural universal design, where UDL was born from. Universal design, it has 7 principles for design. And so that's really how we're framing this, because it's the easiest way to digest architectural standards for accessibility. So if you do a quick Google search, I will show you the picture in a second once it pulls back up. But or in a little bit, oh, it's next. Oh, it is next. Amazing. So once we pull that, do you want to go to the next slide?
You ought to just go on to that.
Yeah, so I can show you.
We're just going to skip the Confluence.
Gotcha. Okay.
So
it's good. Maybe at the end we'll pull up our Confluence page because this isn't going well. Yeah. So if you pull up Universal Design for Architecture and you're looking in Google Images, you'll find an image that really shows you all the 7 different pieces of design. So a lot of those things have to do with how easy something is to, like if you think about a button, right? So a lot of our AV systems have either touchscreens or buttons, but how easy is it to push that button? Not everyone has the same strength. Where's the location of that button? What was it? Oh. So that's kind of how we're framing it. We put a lot of this information into our Confluence page because there's so many people in this working group and everybody comes from a different place in terms of accessibility. So Matthew and I really, oh, here it is. Thank you. Yay. So equitable use, that was a big one for me. I want someone, whether they're using a wheelchair, whether they don't have speech communication, whether they're blind or low vision, to be able to enter a room and be able to set up the system in the room for AV, whatever makes sense for them. So equitable use is incredibly important from a moral and ethical standpoint, but also from a legal standpoint. That's where you see the litigation around this kind of the computer classrooms or classrooms in general is around equal use or equitable use. Other ones up here, flexibility in use, right? So this is where some of our innovations came in. Well, how can we ensure that when someone enters a room, no matter what their specific needs may be, that the equipment in the room or is able to be activated in the way that they need and it's personalized? Simple and intuitive. So that goes to more of the cognitive components. We leave out the population of people with cognitive needs frequently, but that's actually quite a high population of individuals in the world, but in higher ed as well. You want that design to be clean, kind of what Luis was talking about. We have perceptible information. It should make sense. It should respond to you. The responsivity is really important as well. So it's useless if you have a button that you can physically press, but you don't know what it does, if it doesn't tell you what it does. Tolerance for error, low physical effort, size and space for approach and use. Make sure people can get to it. So this is how we're framing those standards. And that's how we're framing our future innovations. There's actually something missing from vision, hearing, mobility, and learning and cognitive. There is one area that I did mention just a second ago that's not up here. Does anyone know what that might be? That'd be really important. Speech. For people who maybe are using a speech generating device, or who, like what we saw, have a really specific type of vocal quality that might be not as loud or robust. So that should really be up here too. So we're really thinking about these different category areas. When it comes to faculty, we instruct them on, when you're planning an activity, make sure that you run through your mind the different possibilities of students you might have in your class, and this is one way to frame that for them. We don't like to put people in boxes, but we do want people to be aware, and sometimes the only way to make them aware is to make it tangible. So if they run through that checklist in their mind, the same should be true of our spaces that we're teaching in. So one thing that we started talking about in terms of innovations was if this, then that, IFTTT. So it's a really neat concept. We're not going to click that link because I'm scared to click anything. But you can read more about IFTTT. And you all have access to these presentations for all of today. So please do go in there and learn more about if this, then that, because it allows you to set up systems and set up controls so that if you do something, it will respond in such a way. iOS devices have environmental controls built in, so you're able to control your environment by hitting a button, as long as you have access to the technology, the app that you need, and the system you need to connect to something. Like if I were to walk into this classroom and I had my iPhone and I was connected to the electronic controls on the dimmers or the system that's set up, I could turn the lights on and off by a touch or a voice activation or something on my iPhone. We want that flexibility and use to be available in our classrooms in some way.
And that, we asked the question when Kelsey was done with giving her initial feedback to the group. We said, well, what would you want? And she kept bringing up, well, they have this thing for at home, like the light switches or the dimmers, and using the touch button iOS. And that's how we kind of started digging more into the details of the AV systems that are run in a classroom or more office environment compared to the home, because consumer equipment is oftentimes a lot different. And right now, accessibility on the consumer end is outpacing the other equipment that we have a lot of right now.
So it's really important to kind of consider that, and to consider the devices that people use. Not everyone uses iOS. iOS is incredibly flexible and really extensive for what it does for accessibility. Android is not really quite there yet. And so then we started talking about things like Microsoft or Amazon, things like that. What environmental controls can we consider for these classrooms, and how can we integrate it? So one of the ways that we're going to be working towards this is we have a small flexible classroom, and we have some funding for this classroom. There are some images up here of the classroom itself. It's a flex space. It's called an experimental classroom. There's tons of screens in it that can be moved around, lots of movable furniture. There's projector screens. And the purpose of this is what it's used for currently is to collect data on how instructors teach, and to help them with integrating more technology advanced instruction into what they're doing. So we thought, well, this is similar to a lot of our classrooms on campus. Generally speaking, we have more classrooms that are about this size or a little bigger, that have movable desks and chairs and tables, have multiple screens. It's pretty comparable to the majority of campus. So this could be largely scaled. So this is the room that we're going to be taking to kind of go forth with some of these basic experiments in innovation for AV, which is really exciting.
And it's very nice to have a sandbox that we can put something in there or bring something in from a vendor, even furniture and shapes of furniture for allowing certain areas to be accessible or not has been proven to be very useful. You can kind of see that the shapes we have in there currently are rounded trapezoids. So there's not actually a straight line on any of them. And we kind of are now taking the next step of, we like part of that. We've now reached out to a furniture company, and we're like, we kind of like this, but could we do a different shape kind of like this? And they're like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, we could try that. So we're trying to work on getting the next version of that after getting the feedback from both the users, instructors, everything. So this is the reason why I'm here, and the reason why I started putting things together with Matt and Kelsey. This is the AV diagram for the Feinberg Innovation Space. This is one classroom that seats 25.
Mhm.
And the idea is that the original idea, without even considering accessibility, is that someone attending this class, remote or in person, has the same exact experience. Not just the person attending it as a student, but the person attending it as a potential instructor. So whether you are at home or in the classroom, there needs to be two-way communication in every way we do it, whether it's voice, touch, whiteboard, etc. So I'm just gonna go over there. This is pretty typical of a network of an AV drawing. In the middle of the AV drawing, there's usually a controller. And most of them are a company called Extron or Crestron. They have modules and inputs for every type of device: lighting, sound. You can have air conditioning, heating, shade control. Those are the companies that do that. However, these are much more older companies. So their VPATs, when we asked for them, are, I think the only one we got back was from 2001.
Yeah, it was like 2001 or 2. It was probably one of the oldest VPATs I've seen, which is scary because that means that either no one's asked or they don't care.
So that was one of the, that's the brain of the whole room. Then you have your space for the teachers to write. Traditionally whiteboards, chalkboards. Now everyone's kind of starting to use some smaller screens. Well, we are actually going to have 2 output screens at the front of the room that are 86 inches wide. And they are not IR. So there's infrared sensors around a lot of these large touch screens. And if you put your finger there, it doesn't always line up. These are actually in glass like your smartphone screens. And the reason we needed to do that was, how can a teacher remotely write on the board? Or how could the teaching assistant make a correction or a thought on the board for then the teacher to be able to see it if they're not teaching in that room? So that was one of the things that got me initially going to Kelsey going, so I know we've had issue installing digital signage because that is in the ADA rules. What about these? And she said, yeah, that's going to fall under. So we're currently working on some solutions because these screens are actually larger than the dimensions that are allowed under the ADA law because they don't even fit. So we're trying to figure out how we're going to do that. One of the ways we're doing that is the screens will actually be height adjustable themselves.
And one thing too is like the faculty question. Part of this is also related to pedagogical approaches for instruction. So the technology can't do it all. Teaching someone that when they're writing something on the board, it should be verbalized, like basic things like that should also be done. So it goes hand in hand, but we're trying to set up the experience for them to be successful from the get-go.
So what I just described, having some microphones in the ceiling, some speakers in the ceiling, that's all kind of a traditional setup nowadays. Here's the change. How am I talking to you guys right now? Which direction am I facing for those that can see? Am I faced toward the audience or am I faced toward the screen? I'm toward the audience. So that's how I wanted the teachers to be able to teach. I don't need a camera or a person sitting in the back of the room looking at the back of my head as I'm writing up on the screen. I want to be looking at my students and people that I'm working with in the space. So we also need two-way communication within the room with the teacher facing out. What we have is a graphic designer's tablet on a height adjustable podium. If you want to go to the next one. Sorry, so these are the sections of the operable parts, the work surfaces, the reach ranges, the knee and toe clearance, the protruding objects, and the assisted listening systems I was kind of talking about from the AV installation laws. And we have links to all these too. Sorry.
No.
And the next one. So this is the picture of the height adjustable screen I was talking about. This is the kind of the tactile input that Kelsey was talking about for the room controls, because everyone's always touchscreen now. And this is a video playing of the height adjustable desks that ended up being crucial to the whole design. for the actual instructor in
So
the
the,
room.
the video itself is just showing the desk adjusting up and down based on different user needs who are approaching the desk and interacting with computer technology.
So we have, instead of a computer sitting on the desk, we have a graphic designer's tablet. It's 24 inches wide. It's height adjustable, angle adjustable, and then there's a pen. You can use your touch finger too, and it can be disabled with a button, but it's an actual pen. And the pen gives tactile feedback like you're writing on paper. And so the idea is, if you are writing on the tablet, it's also writing up on the screen. Once we have this in a computer system, that screen can then be sent out via Zoom like we're doing now. And so someone with their own touch screen join in not necessarily Zoom, but like several other products like Cisco Teams, Microsoft Teams, a bunch of them like that. You can have two-way communication of people writing up on the board no matter where you're at, including if you're in the back of the room and the teacher calls on you to answer a question or fill in the blank. You could write on the screen from the back of the room on your own device at your own convenience, and that also kind of lends itself to the accessibility discussion that Kelsey and I started having up. Sometimes it's hard for people to bring up if they have a disability, and they want to be able to use their own devices and their own systems. And making it equitable was a big thing. We don't want to be making a change just to make it accessible. We want to build it in from the start as the same for everybody. You can choose your experience depending on how you need or want it. So if we can go to the next one. So the whole using your own device thing and the desired innovations that Kelsey was kind of talking about, you know, from the home use, if I want to push a button, I want to turn the lights on, or I want to walk in and I want to, you know, have the music start playing. And so we started talking a lot about potential uses with these fancier in-room systems like Extron and Crestron. And there really isn't anything. But there are some things that people are working on with AI. Like we were just told in the, or shown in the previous presentation, AI really could be a very big help for this. Since we already have a computer running in the Feinberg innovation space, we've started discussing with several potential partners, including Microsoft. We want to reach out to Amazon, we want to reach out to Apple too. We want to get the AI running in the room on that PC with the microphone inputs always on, so that, and the camera system always on. So if we had potentially sign language, could control the room systems of turn on screen, turn on left, turn on right, or you just walk in and you go, turn on computer, turn on screen, start presenting, or start transmitting. And we have an example of this. So the reason I had reached out to Microsoft and for someone that used to work at UMass, a colleague of mine, and she said, well, we're kind of already working on this. Have you seen this? And I hadn't. So this video is a meeting that is a demonstration meeting of a couple people sitting at a desk. The AI is running in the room controls. There are microphones, speakers, and there's a screen up on the wall as well that they're using to share some content. Is that a good description, Kelsey?
Yeah, and some people are attending remotely. So this is kind of going to show you the experience of having a meeting as much as in person as possible with remote people who are essentially zooming in, but via Microsoft. And the screen in the background is tracking the things they're saying, but also taking notes from what they're saying as well.
Oh, did we test the audio out on this guy first?
No,
Do you
but
mind if I check real quick, Matt?
Sure.
Let's do the other one. Oh, that's not gonna be good. Yeah, we didn't do audio.
is a speaker on the right speaker.
one?
I don't know if this is a speaker audio.
I think it's just a microphone.
Oh, yeah, it is.
All right, we will. Well,
There's
everyone
closed
does have
captioning
access
on
to
it
it,
too,
so
but,
we will try.
Yeah. Let's go all the way.
Yeah, so it's gonna.
I think that's the, yeah.
All right, it's gonna. That's gonna. It is what it is. No. We got to get out of presenter mode.
I think there was a play button on it.
Yeah, we'll just do it from.
Yeah. You have to put it, I think, in play. It's not on the screen anymore.
Would you like to start the
It's not
meeting?
There's
showing on the screen.
nothing on the
Yes,
screen. I
please.
think it has to be in.
I think it has to be showing on the screen,
Yeah.
then click it on the screen.
Yeah, you could click it on the screen. Okay. Sorry, guys.
Like we said, technical.
Always. Okay. Can I see that really quick, Matthew? Thank you. No, it's not letting you.
Yeah, we need to get
That's
out
what I
of
mean. It's
center
like the cursor has to be on the screen.
Oh, it's not on.
Oh, I have it
Oh,
on the screen.
oh, gotcha.
Oh,
Thank you,
gotcha.
Matthew. Winning.
Would you like to start the meeting? Yes, please. I know Katie and Julia are coming from another meeting, so let's go ahead and get started. Dave, what's the latest with the smart building pilot?
I've already done some preliminary analysis on the data, and I'm finding some high temperature outliers. We should discuss it later in the meeting.
Okay, sounds great.
Dave, do you know if we'll have enough of the Yancy multi-sensors to update the showcase floor?
Actually, I have some concerns about the location of those sensors. We should hold off on doing a one-to-one replacement until I can...
Oh, I'm really sorry to interrupt, Dave. I actually have some ideas about the replacement, so maybe let's connect after the meeting.
Okay, that's good to know. I'll follow up with my team and post an update to the channel after the meeting.
And I'll follow up and send Yancy an email about those showcase sensors.
Okay, that sounds great.
Now, take a look at the transcript behind me on the left. Even though we were all speaking over each other and the sound environment here is actually pretty challenging, the AI services coupled with the audio and video signals from the device could still accurately identify who was speaking and when. You'll also notice that it picked up our meeting items and listed them on the right. And the voice recognition model has been trained over time to understand our team's unique communication style and recognizes our speech patterns even when we're speaking in business jargon. This not only helps the interactions in the meeting room, but it helps remote participants have a more active meeting experience.
So one of the things that we cut it off for a reason there is it also can do live translations. So while it's taking those meeting minutes, it could then also translate that for those that have chosen a different language.
So these are the things that we're really trying to work on at UMass Amherst and AV. We're bolstering this with the small scale classroom that will be larger scaled because more of our classrooms are similar in comparison to something like the Feinberg project, which was incredibly expensive and unlikely to be quickly advanced to all of our classrooms on campus. So we're trying a small scale and a large scale. And that's purposeful because it's really neat to see what we can do with something like the Feinberg project when we're given funding. But it's also really important to see what we can do when our funding is limited and we have so many classrooms on our campus.
So we already are taking lessons even from designing the Feinberg room, which we are still building right now, and applying it to the renovation like Kelsey was talking about that we're going to do small scale for 720, going, yeah, that's great. We have this built-in power for eventually if we get integrating the AI into the classroom. But for now, we could take this little piece out and more teachers could probably use this and they would like it.
And so right now what we really want you guys to do, because this is what we're doing and this is our experience on our very large sprawling campus, we want you guys to have a chat at your table. So even if you want to jump, the two of you maybe jump behind you, about what your campus is doing. What are the barriers you're experiencing in terms of your AV equipment? Like, why are you here right now with us? How are you addressing those barriers? Are you addressing them? Is this maybe the first thought that you have in this process right here? And what innovations have you used if you've done something already, or what are you hoping to do on your campus? And I'm really hoping that you spend some time talking to each other about filling out this sheet that you can bring back to your campuses to get this going, because this is so important. We have students on our campus who need access in the rooms because they're presenting to their peers. We have faculty and staff who also need equal and equitable access to be able to present in a way that's meaningful to their students. And anybody should be able to walk into a room in the place that they're employed or the place that they attend and to have that access. So that's our whole goal. And so we're gonna spread ourselves out to your different tables. And we want you to have these conversations addressing these questions, and also start thinking about this worksheet. Who can you talk to?
One of the things that I forgot to mention right before this was we are still formalizing this document. We still haven't officially published our standards. It's just a draft right now. even internally. But because of this one group that we've been working on for some time, a couple other groups that have formed this summer have now referenced us and gone, so we need an ADA section in here? And we go, yes, you should.
Of course.
So other groups, because we've already started it, have started copying us. And we've gotten some good feedback from them to actually change some of our stuff. So once we got it started, we realized that people aren't against it. They just don't know where to start.
I think the unique thing about this too is when it becomes something that's kind of homegrown versus a mandate, it changes the tone a little bit. So how we present it and that allowing people to be so innovative with what they're doing totally set the stage for that meeting in general. And I've never seen so many people have so many interesting ideas that were just ping-ponging off of a wall, being like, we have to try this, we have to think about this, and just allowing it to happen and now being able to move forward with that is so important. So that's why getting all those different people in the room is critical. Everyone has a different expertise. Everyone's brain works in a different way. And I think that's incredibly valuable to this process. So building some excitement about it, letting people get a little too crazy and then figuring it out from there is totally okay. It's actually welcomed. That's how we have innovation. So we're going to spend about 10 to 15 minutes doing this in small groups together, and then we'll come back and kind of share and chat as a bigger group, and any questions or anything that you guys have for each other or for us. So we'll spread ourselves out. I'm so sorry. All right. So, hi everybody. We had an awesome conversation. I hope you guys did too. So I'm hoping that we are going to develop a subgroup, Christina, of the accessibility working group, and we'll talk about it later. If you're on the accessibility information or the website and the group, the working group, look out for it. It's coming our way. So I'm really excited. Great. Okay, did this freeze? What's happening? Oh, okay. Anyone want to share anything quickly? We have how long? 5 minutes. Great. Thoughts, questions. I also just want to let you know, we posted our contact information up here. Take a picture, write it down. It's also on your copy of the presentation that you have from the retreat website. Please get in touch with us and stay in touch. This is really important that we all pull together for these things, for resources, but also for time. So please reach out to us. Also, for the Assistive Technology Center at UMass Amherst, we do have social media. Follow us. We post some really interesting things, and if you have information, we want to hear about it. We also have a podcast. So we've interviewed some really neat people on that, and we've got really neat people coming up as well. So definitely check that out, but please stay in touch. Questions, thoughts? Are you ready to do this on your campus? How can we work together? Things like that.
Nobody's.
No one. Oh, yes.
So in addition to the grant that's funding the Feinberg Center, how else do you fund these efforts?
So do you want to take it or do you want me to?
You can start.
Okay. So, so 720, for example, the small room that you saw that's more scalable in terms of this project, generally speaking, we have a very amazing man named Robert Davis, who's a part of our team, and he manages a lot of the funding for our computer classrooms. And what he does is a lot of forward thinking. So we plan for certain things like innovations in our budget for the following fiscal year. So he puts aside a certain amount of that funding to do projects like this, because as Luis was saying, don't plan for current you, plan for future you. We do a lot of future planning around innovations. Luckily, the name of our group as of right now is Instructional Innovation. So it's anticipated to come from our group, those types of things. And so that type of funding is allocated in that way for these types of projects.
And Robert Davis is one of my bosses, and he was, like Kelsey said, very forward thinking, and he told me for the Feinberg project, go ahead, design it. I know you have some thoughts on it, but you're not allowed to use anything we have currently. And I went, oh, okay.
Talk about innovation.
And so it was definitely a top-down approach from my perspective of my boss actually saying, step outside the comfort zone, blow it up, start from scratch.
Also, one really important thing, and Keith, I'm so glad you're in the room because I'll be coming at you for this. I have no problem asking vendors for money and things, because part of what vendors do is they get their product in your room so that they can expand it, and potentially you might buy it eventually. So one way to test things is to partner. So that's a really good thing to do, is to say, hey, what cool things are you doing? We want to get in on that. Let's do that together and see where it goes. And I think that's incredibly important, especially for a system like UMass. We are large. We have clout. We can move things. If we're doing it together, we are able to do that more so. So I would say free things for testing is a great way to do it too, to work together, because you're also then informing the vendor what's working for you and what's not, and how can you make this better. So building those partnerships is crucial for accessibility research, for accessibility support, all of that. So it doesn't always have to cost a ton of money, as long as you find vendors who are willing to partner.
Also, once you get some good vendors or bars to get certain vendors, I go, hey, I saw the thing on Infocom. I want to use it in blank case, because, and then you tell them the bigger scale, and almost always they'll give you at least a month trial, if not 2 or 3 months.
Which is great.
Especially if when they see the small experimental classroom, they're like, yeah, we want feedback though, and they'll give requirements for what type of feedback they want. I'm like, great, we're already taking that anyway from the people using the product, so
yeah,
we can pass it on.
So that's a great way to save some money, but also really figure out, well, what can we do? Like, how can we use this? There's
some stuff that didn't cost a lot of money for us to start changing the design. Like, it actually saved us money to make some stuff more accessible. Like, everything is touchscreen now, touchscreen. Well, for the room controls, when you walk in, guess what? That does you no good if there's
no feedback.
If there's no feedback and the screen reader on, because the room control systems don't have that yet. So guess what? Our minimum requirement is push buttons. If you want to add a touchscreen, great, but you know what you need first? A push button. And it needs to be the same one in the same location, no matter what.
So consistency as well. But yeah, it's a good question though. Oh, 1 minute. So any last thought? Yes, last thought.
Are you constructing a list of vendors that help you with this, or that provide services so that you can all use the same vendors?
We can do that once we start aggregating some of these people that we're using.
Yeah, even the Feinberg space, we're building it right now. And a lot of this has just been proof of concept. Like, we get this little piece, test it out, yep, okay, add it. Get this little piece, yep, test, add it. And we haven't even considered or let the vendors know about the larger scale rollout of the other stuff.
So absolutely. And I think a lot of the vendors that we are reaching out to or will be are people that most of the schools in the system do use in some way. So there's already relationships built for most of them. So that will be good.
Like, specifically for Feinberg, our 2 big vendors are Connection, PC Connection, and Carousel. Those are our 2 big vendors.
And then we think about things like Microsoft, Amazon, Apple.
Yeah, we want to get them fighting over each other.
You hear that, Keith?
All right.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Please stay in touch.